Hey, welcome! Have you ever found yourself just staring at a sparkling gemstone and wondering, how in the world did it get that perfect, dazzling color? Well, the answer? It's usually this incredible mix of nature, a little bit of art, and some seriously clever science. So today, let's pull back the curtain on the hidden world of gemstone treatments. But that brings up a really fascinating question. I mean, just take a look at any jewelry you might have on right now. Is that stone exactly the way it came out of the ground? The answer might actually surprise you. So, here's what we're going to dive into. First, we'll uncover some of the industry's oldest secrets. Then we'll get into everything from a simple splash of color to a full-on trial by fire. After that, we're going to investigate the super high-tech and kind of controversial diffusion dilemma, see how jewelers fix flaws to get a clearer picture, and then we'll wrap it all up with what you really need to know as a buyer to shop smart. All right, first up, the gemstone's secret. Now, I know when we hear the word treatment, it can sound a little sketchy, right? But the truth is, enhancing gemstones is a practice that's basically as old as the jewelry trade itself. So, what are we really talking about here? Well, a gemstone treatment is just any process other than the basic cutting and polishing that's done to make a gem look better. Improve its color or clarity, increase its value, or even just make it more durable. It's an incredibly common, totally accepted part of the industry. And this quote right here just shows you how far back this goes. I mean, the absolute oldest trick in the book was to literally just stick a piece of shiny foil behind a gem to make its color pop. It's safe to say today's methods are, well, they're a little more sophisticated. So if foil was the original hack, what's the modern version? Well, it all starts with the simplest enhancements, just adding a splash of color. We're talking about dyes and coatings, which are basically surface-level makeovers for gems. And it's pretty wild to see how some of our most famous gemstones get their signature look. That iconic deep blue turquoise, it's often stabilized by soaking it in wax or even plastic. And black onyx, get this, is very often just a grayish stone called chalcedony that's been soaked in a sugar solution and then blackened with acid. Even something like coral gets dyed red or bleached to create that beautiful golden color. But okay, what happens when you go deeper than just the surface? Well, that brings us to our next section, trial by fire. Now we're talking about heat and irradiation, powerful treatments that permanently change a gem's atomic structure, and along with it, its color. And the transformations, wow, they can be absolutely stunning. Heating is standard for zircon. It can take a kind of drab, brown stone and turn it into a brilliant blue, or even totally colorless gem. And tanzanite, which is one of the most popular gems out there, often starts out with these brownish tones before heat treatment brings out that famous, vivid sapphire blue. That perfect shade of blue you see in aquamarine? Well, that's often the result of some pretty intense heat. A lot of the dark blue stones you see on the market are made by heating greenish material to somewhere between 400 and 450 degrees Celsius. This permanently changes the color, creating that rare and valuable look from much more common material. But this brings up a really crucial point. Let's talk about blue topaz. That deep blue color, it doesn't actually exist in nature. It's made by irradiating colorless topaz. Here's the catch, though. There's no way to tell the difference, no way to prove it was treated. And once that became common knowledge, the massive price gap between natural and treated blue topaz just vanished. It was a huge wake-up call for the gem world. And that leads us right to the modern frontier of gem enhancement. And this is where things can get a little controversial. Let's call it the diffusion dilemma. This is where high-tech science can run into some really murky ethics.
So what exactly is diffusion? Okay, think of it like you're marinating a gemstone, but at an atomic level. At super high temperatures, chemical elements like beryllium or copper are literally forced into the gem's crystal structure. These new impurities change how the gem absorbs light, and boom, you've got a brand new color.
And this brings us to probably the most infamous example of this entire practice, a gemstone that was marketed as red andesine. This stone's story got so out of hand that the industry itself had some very, very strong words for what happened.
Yeah, egregious. That's some pretty powerful language, and honestly, it was for a very good reason. The story behind this stone is a perfect case study in why telling the truth, why disclosure, is just so critical.
So here's the bottom line. The stone was sold as the super rare, naturally red gem that came from only a few specific places, like Oregon. But the reality? Lab tests confirmed that it was actually a common, pale yellow feldspar that had been diffusion treated with copper to give it that red color. The scale of the deception was just massive.
Okay, but changing a gem's color is really only half the story. The other major area for enhancements is all about improving a gem's clarity. Getting a clearer picture by fixing the flaws inside.
I just love this little detail from the industry. Emeralds are famous for their internal flaws, right? But instead of calling them imperfections, the trade has this beautiful poetic name for them, the jardin, which is French for garden. And for centuries, the main goal has been to make that little garden just a bit less visible. The way it works is actually pretty clever and surprisingly simple. It's kind of like fixing a tiny crack in your car's windshield. You take the emerald, with all its tiny surface-reaching cracks, and you soak it in oil or epoxy. That filler seeps into the cracks, and because its refractive index is similar to the emerald's, the cracks basically just disappear. The whole stone suddenly looks clearer, more transparent, more brilliant. So with all this hidden art and science going on behind the scenes, what do you need to know? Well, that brings us to our final and maybe most important section, how you can go from just being a gem admirer to being a really informed consumer. Believe it or not, you can actually spot some of these treatments yourself. If you look under magnification, you might see that dye is concentrated in tiny little cracks. Simple wax coatings, they can often be scratched. Sometimes, just a little rubbing alcohol on a cotton swab is enough to lift the color right off a dyed stone. Even with diamonds, a professional can spot the microscopic tunnels left behind by lasers used to remove inclusions. And that brings us to the single most important thing to take away from all of this. Ready? The treatments themselves, the heating, the oiling, even the irradiation, they are not the problem. That stuff is a normal, accepted part of the industry. The problem, the real issue, is the secrecy. It's when those treatments aren't disclosed. That's when enhancement crosses the line into fraud.
So I'll just leave you with this one question to think about. In a world where beauty can be manufactured, literally, at an atomic level, where do we draw the line? At what point does making something more beautiful become a beautiful lie? Thanks for tuning in.